Right, good afternoon. Well, I'm gonna go through changing the chain and both sprockets on a 2016 S1000RR. Just a brief run through of the tools that you'll probably need for this job. So, to start with, you need a chain tool. I have a Motion Pro chain tool. This requires two spanners to use, so you need a 17mm and a 14mm spanner to use that. To remove the rear sprocket, you need an 18mm socket. To remove the speed sensor if you want to, which makes it a little bit easier to take the rear wheel off. I tend to leave it in place, but to remove that you need a T25 Torx. To remove the front sprocket cover, need a T30 Torx. You also need a set of verniers when you get around to doing the chain, putting a new chain on. You need a 34mm socket for the rear nut and a 32mm socket for the front sprocket. You also need a 10 and 13mm spanner for doing the tension on the rear chain. What also helps is rear paddock stand, support the bike while the rear wheel is off, and to help get the wheel on off a bit easier, a couple of wedges just to help support the tire. What also will come in handy is a torque wrench, quite high torques for the nuts on the rear sprocket and also the main nut on the front. And what you might also need is something to help you push the rear brake when you're doing the final torques. So, in an ideal world, what you normally do is remove the rear wheel, take the rear sprocket off on using a bench and a vise. I don't have that to hand, so I'm going to do things slightly differently in that I'm going to loosen some of the bolts on the bike. Makes it a bit easier to do rather than having to undo some very tight bolts without proper tools on the bench. Well, let's get started. So first thing I'm going to do is loosen the bolts on the rear sprocket while everything's still done up. That allows me to loosen those bolts, and then I'll start getting the rear wheel off, and then work my way forward, get the cover off, make sure there isn't anything that's too surprising in there. So yeah, let's get started. So this is the 18mm socket, and let's see if we can get these nuts undone. So pop the bike into first gear. That will hopefully allow us to undo these. Right, that's all of those loose. Just to make sure there aren't any surprises, we're going to take this front cover off. And actually looking at it, we'll probably have to take the shift engager off as well. So to do this, this is again the T30 tool. And that pops out. That should hopefully be enough room to allow us to get this cover off. What you might need to do is use a ratchet if the torque is a little bit high on these, which in my case they're coming out okay, but we'll see. one thing when you take this off is you'll see the cable for the kickstand switch goes through this connection, which should just easily pull out behind the plastic clips, and that's off. So what you see is it's quite greasy inside. Using a stock 1000 chain cleaner, or well, chain oil, and that does pick up quite a lot of oil. So just put these bolts to one side. They are all the same length, so they can just stay with that, and we'll clean it up in a bit. So what you can see is we now have access to the front sprocket. Looking a little bit worn, but not too bad, but definitely time to change that. So let's try and clean up my hands. Should be using gloves for this, and then we'll now get around to taking off the rear wheel. So I'm just going to use the 34mm socket and undo the rear axle. The washer as well can come off. We'll get all that cleaned up shortly. At this point, I'll just put the wedges underneath here, make sure that nothing moves as we take the axle out. So this should, in theory, just push out. So let's get on the other side, and might need a little bit of persuasion to pull out. I'm just going to gently tap this with a rubber hammer just to get that moving. Actually, we'll pause at this point, and actually what we'll do is we'll, now with the axle moving a little bit, we'll just undo the chain using the chain tool. It's been a while since I've done this, but, so this is the chain tool, and what we want to do is set it up to brake. So this little insert, and what we want to do is to put that in brake mode. So you've got a B on there next to the B for brake. Pull this out a bit, put the handle in, makes it a little bit easier to hold. You can also just cut the chain off with an angle grinder. I choose this, it's a bit quieter and works quite well. So what you want to do is to pull the pin all the way to the back, make sure there's plenty of space, pull the clamp out, and then I normally just clamp it over one of the pins just over by the sprocket. Tighten that up a bit by hand. Then you get 17mm spanners. 17mm one just clamps up against the chain, make sure that's tight, and then you just slowly wind in using 14mm spanner. Alright, that pin is now hopefully completely out, and what we'll do is that's the pin we've just pushed out, and what you can see is it's actually not too badly worn. A little bit of wear just on the edges or chain runs, but it's actually pretty clean, and not all that much wear on this one. Well, that is the chain fully off, and it's quite dirty. I want to clean the chain before I removed it. So we can just put this to one side. Now we should be in a position to, I'll just put the chain tool to one side and just make sure it is ready for use next. So next time we'll be using it in press mode. So that'll be up like this, but we'll run through that in a bit more detail shortly. So now we should be able to easily extract the axle and drop the rear wheel down. So that's the rear axle. As you can see, it's actually still quite well greased from last time I had the rear wheel off, which wasn't too long ago. Newer tires, probably been on for a couple thousand miles, so that's what it should look like. Well greased, no real signs of corrosion. We'll clean that up a little bit before it goes back on. Just again, put that to one side. And this block will probably also come out, so we'll just again put that to one side with the rear axle. So now the rear wheel is supported on the two wedges, and what we can now do is carefully take it out. Careful with the speed sensor on the other side, unless you have taken that off, in which case don't really have to worry about it, but there's enough room to slowly drop the rear wheel out. And one thing you want to avoid when the rear wheel is out, to make sure that you don't press the rear brake, because that'll cause the pistons to come out of the rear caliper. Okay. And the thing to be careful of is this might fall out. So that should come out. One thing to check is, while you have this like this, is make sure that your rear wheel bearings are free to move. So that rotates quite well. And just check the other side as well. Yeah, that's nice and free to move. So we don't actually have to take the rear wheel out all the way, as long as we have that off, and then we can undo these wheel nuts further, and also start to get the front sprocket off. Okay, so put this on some soft padding, just make sure we don't scratch it, and then we should be able to these are single-use lock nuts, so they go straight into the bin along with the old chain. Sprocket as well, we're putting a new one on. This one's actually in reasonably good condition. You can see that they have opened up a little bit, but it's not too bad. But when we get the front sprocket out, you'll see a bit more. There's generally a lot more wear in the front sprocket, so that's normally one that sees a lot more wear than the rear. just have a good look over this as well. Make sure the bearing on this is running smooth. This one's not too bad. We'll give that a bit of a cleanup as well. So let's put that to one side, and now I'll just take off the front sprocket, and then we have everything apart. So to remove the front one, just have to again put the bike into gear, which is that's now in gear, and then put that on. One thing that we also need to do is to on these, it has been flattened off, so effectively it's a lock washer, so we need to just flatten that out before we try to take the nut off. So I'll just get a screwdriver to help with that. And you can get a tool to help with this, but we're improvising a little bit here. Right, now we're taking the sprocket off the front. You would have loosened the nut with chain still on, just so you can drive against the rear brake if you need to. We've got the bike in first gear, and we flattened off the washer. We just got a little breaker bar on here because it's a little bit tight, and let's try to loosen it. Right, there we go. So, got a nut. I did get a new one. Just felt like replacing it this time. I don't think you necessarily need to. And this is the retaining washer, which there's definitely a new one of. So, put those two one side to get rid of, and then the sprocket just comes off. Thing to note is when you take it off, remember which way it goes back on, so you have the large flange towards the engine. What you can see here as well is quite a bit of wear on the sprocket itself, so that definitely needs changing. Generally it's a good idea to change both front and rear sprockets when you do the chain. So we've got quite a bit of cleaning to do, so we'll get everything cleaned up and then start to reassemble. Right, so we've degreased everything. Now it's time to start to put a few things back together again. Quite a bit more cleaning maybe to do around here. At least we've cleaned the axle, cleaned the chain guard, and everything else. So yeah, we'll do a bit more cleaning in around here, and also the chain runner here, and then we'll throw it all back together again. Okay, that's most of the grease taken off in that area. We'll tidy up a bit more as we're assembling. So, first thing we need to do is to get the sprockets back on, and then get the rear wheel on, and then we thread the chain through. And then we need to do final tightening sequence once the chain is on. That's just so we can get the torque on using the rear brake to hold everything in place. So we'll just start with just getting the chain guard back into place. So this just fits in back here and just self-locates quite well. So that's in place, just so we don't forget that as we're assembling things. And we need a new sprocket. So this comes oiled up. That should be fine to use. And remember that the bit with the extra flange goes towards the engine. So we can just pop that on, that slides on. And then we have the new lock washer. So that just slides on. And locates on the splines. And then, as I mentioned previously, we also have a new nut to use this time. Normally you don't need to replace the nut. The other one had a few marks on it, so I just thought I'd replace that. I'm just going to put a little bit of grease on this as I'm putting it on. Generally should be okay, but a little bit of grease won't hurt, just to make sure it goes on smoothly. So we'll just effectively hand tighten this. We have to do the final torque once the chain is on, and we can actually apply the right torque. So the thing to be careful of here is that the washer doesn't slide off the splines, and we don't trap it. So you have to carefully feel and make sure that that stays on as you are tightening the nut. So that's now on. Everything looks to be in order and good. So I'm just going to double check that the splines are actually engaged on that, and yes, that all looks good. Okay, so that's now on. Then we have to get the rear sprocket holder on. So what we'll do is, to make this a little bit easier, we'll just get the sprocket on here first, and then we'll fit that onto the wheel. So we have new nuts, which is quite important, so those always need to be replaced whenever you change the sprocket. And we have the new sprocket. So sprocket, there's no direction to it, so that can go on whichever direction. I normally put it on with part numbers showing to the outside, just so that you can see what's on there. If you ever need to get spare parts, you have the part number. So that goes on like that. And then we just go and fit the nuts. So what we'll actually do is put a little drop of grease on these, just to make it a little bit easier to drop off once, if you ever take this off again. Just because I ride in a lot of rain with this bike, so you do get a little bit of corrosion setting in, and basically you don't want these nuts to be impossible to get off in a year's time, or however long you need to wear out your chain. So just spraying a little bit of this on, and then we'll wind on the nuts. Just continue to tighten these just while we have it here. And the thing to note is there's two different tightening sequences depending on what type of wheel you have. If you have forged wheels, it's a lower torque. So I think with forged wheels, which I don't have, but forged wheels would be 70 Newton meters and extra 90 degrees. With the standard wheels, which I have, it is 125 Newton meter torque, if I have that correct. No, sorry, 110 Newton meter torque with the standard wheels. So what I'm doing is just tighten these up. So we put on, we won't be able to achieve the full tightening torque just holding it on the ground. If you have a vise, then that's the best way to do it, is to clamp this in the vise and do each one up to 110 Newton meter torque. But what we'll do is just get these just initially tightened, so they're all just snugged up. And then other thing to remember is, because axle's going through here, need to make sure there's a bit of grease on just the inside of the bearing and inside of this runner. So we'll just wipe some grease into that before we put it on. It's easier to do now than it will be later once it's assembled. So we'll just stick this in and wipe the grease around quite generously, just so everything is nicely coated. Tidy up any overspray. And the thing to not forget is this bit, that needs to go in as well, so we'll put a bit of grease on that as well. Make sure that's nicely greased up. And that can just drop in like that. So grease also helps it to stick in a bit as you put it on. So that just slides in. You have to make sure that the rubber bits are still in position, and also check this bearing is smooth to run, which all looks good. We just push that in. Alright, so that's front sprocket on, rear sprocket on, and now we're in position to put the rear axle back into place. So what we need for that is, I'll just set that there. Need these two blocks again. Just clean up the dirt in here. While we have it. And then what we need to do is to get the rear axle ready. We'll grease that up as well. And just make sure that's well greased, makes it much easier to take apart. Make sure that is well greased. Just add a bit more on. Right, so that is greased. Just fit this one on first. So what you end up with is the axle just locking in place on that end, and that is ready to go in. So fitting the wheel in position, it's a little bit awkward, just one set of hands, especially in these kind of working conditions in the garage. But we'll just get everything back into place. Make sure that, so one thing you have to make sure is that the disc goes in between pads, and pads haven't dislodged in the process. If you do want to clean your caliper, now's a good time to do it. I'm just going to put everything back together again. At this point, we'll probably clean the caliper a bit later. So we can put this, don't need this block yet. So we'll carefully put this back in, and then make sure that everything slides back in place. So got the wedge up here at the front still, and we'll just carefully slide everything into place. Move the wedge forward a little bit, so, and then put this wedge in place so everything's locked into position now, and we can hopefully just slide the axle through. There we go, axle's pushed through. Got a block to put it on this side, that's slid in quite nicely. And then what we need to do is got the washer, slides in there, and then just put a little bit of grease just on the threads. Again, just make sure that nut goes on nice and smooth. It's not too dry after degreasing. So that's now free to go. The one thing you will find is because new chain will be very slightly shorter because the old one was worn. We do need to retract the chain tensioning bits at this point in time. So grab the 10 and 13 mil spanners. 13 mil does the lock nut, so we just loosen that off, and then wind that back, and then we wind forward other bit by hand. We'll go quite a long way forward just to make it a bit easier to get that chain on. Now on forward, we can move the wedges out of the way and just slide the wheel forward. So that's now pushed forward, and we're now getting to the point where we can put the new chain on. So to this, let's put a bit of plastic down on the ground. You'll see why we need that right away. We have new chain link, which is important to have. If you're doing this for the first time, it might be worthwhile getting a second one of these, just in case you're not certain about how you've done it up the first time. The chain comes wrapped in plastic, and this is a standard BMW chain. It is full of grease, so it's very greasy and sticky to handle. So you just need to be wants to be the last thing you unpack before you go ahead and do that. So what we have to keep in mind is front sprocket's not tight yet, and the rear sprocket's not tight yet either, but we'll do that towards the end. If you do have a vise, then your rear sprocket should be tight to 110 Newton meters. Thing to remember is the tightening sequence on bolts, that you always want to go opposite, kind of in a star-shaped pattern to do up those nuts. Alright, let's open up this chain. So it's a new chain. What's fine is the ends are there. So what we'll do is we will just feed this around. Just unwrap it a bit first. And then we can just get in position to feed through. Coming through up here, and then we can gently just keep pulling it through, and then we feed it onto front sprocket. The chain guard, you can see, just takes it around, and then we have it coming out through the bottom here. There we go. So we have got the chain thread around, and then what we want to do now is to do up that front link. I'm just going to take my gloves off a bit because this chain loop is very sticky, as I mentioned before. So it just makes it a bit easier to handle the chain tool once slightly less sticky fingers. Put that to one side. So in this link, what we have is one link, a couple clips just to help you hold things together. I tend not to use those. I just use the sprocket itself to hold things together. You've got 2 of the O-rings, sometimes 3 even. Actually, we've got 3 there, and there should be 1 more in here, so we need 4 in total. That's very important to make sure that those seat properly, and that the chain is well greased, or this link is well greased. So a bit awkward to get out because, again, as I said, everything is very sticky. So that is the 4th O-ring, and the plate as well. So what we want to do is to put 2 of the O-rings on the link. So we just push those on, and I might get rid of these gloves right away because everything is kind of sticking to them. So I'm not sure if you can see that, but effectively we have got the O-rings on. There's no inside or outside to the O-rings. They are symmetric. So that should be more or less good to go. So this bit here will go in from the middle of the bike, effectively from the inside, and then we rivet on from outside. That makes it easier to see the see what we've done to the rivets, and also measure the size of how much we've expanded the rivet on the end. So what we'll do is I'll pull this around a bit more. and just get this on the end here. So what you have is two links next to each other on the sprocket itself. So they should more or less stay in place and give you time to just push this in. So there you go, that just slides straight in like that. So now the chain is kind of held together, and we can now press on the plate. Right, before we press this on, we need to fit the rings on. So we'll just push those on this side, and just make sure they fit in place, and then we put back on. Just give this a quick little clean, and just have to make sure that we put plenty of lube on this once we're at that stage. So it doesn't quite stay on by itself, so we'll just have to very carefully press it all together at once. So this gets a bit tricky, so again we put this into press mode, so effectively like this. Make sure that we have the space for the rivets to go through. That then mounts like this. So what you should see is effectively those two bracket spaces in there are for where the rivets get pushed through to leave plenty of space as we push this plate on. Where we want to end up with is a space of 20.2 millimeters across the width of the chain. Just keep in mind this is a standard BMW chain. If you have an aftermarket chain, it's worthwhile checking the device of that manufacturer. Make sure that you have the right spacing. So this is slightly fiddly bit where we try to put everything together. And we'll do our best here to make sure that all goes together in one hit. So take 17mm spanner, and then we just slowly start to tighten this up. Just checking that we're not pinching the O-rings. Have to very carefully start to push this together. And then we should hopefully start to see the pins come through. Just back this off a bit, and we can just have a quick look where we are. Just check that everything looks sensible. So what we can see there is everything's pressed together, rivets are now flush, and we still have probably quite a bit more to push together. So I won't measure this page at this point because I can see a bit of a gap at the back. So we'll continue to just press this together until we see the gap close up a bit more. Right, looks like we're getting there with this. Let's just check what that distance measures. We'll get the verniers out and just measure across, and and we're at March 20.2 by luck. So that looks good, and just check everything looks reasonable. There isn't an odd difference across the plate, and all the O-rings are sitting insensibly, so that all looks good. We should see from that is that it looks pretty much the same as all the other links, and then that now allows us to press in the rivets. What we need to do is to, now we just press the link together. We should end up with is a square. Once you press it on, it should be a square head. So what we'll do, and what you can see is on the chain all other heads are quite square, so we should be able to see that as well as we tighten it up. So what we do is we put this into rivet mode. So effectively we now have the R there, and that that should be facing the back of the chain then, the single hole there, and that's just space for the rivet to go in. And then we get the riveting head, just make sure there isn't any dust or debris in that. So just clean that out. There we go, that's cleaned out. And then that goes on like so. So that's it's on like that. It's magnetic on this one, so we can just wind that back, and we can just go ahead and put this on, and then what you should find is that the head locates quite well there, and then should hopefully get that fitting all nice and square. Just snug that up, and then we start the tightening process. So again, with the 17mm spanner, and make sure that's sitting flush at the back, and then you very carefully start to compress the rivet head. Normally you need maybe about 90 degrees rotation or so. So I'll just pull that out, and then what you can see is it's nicely buttoned off. So then we just do the rivet head, and then we do the same process. So just snug that up, make sure the back is sitting flush both sides, and then we snug that up, and then we give it about 90 degrees or so. That felt a bit easy, so we'll just go a touch more on that. What you don't want to do is to do this too often. And there we go. Then just pull that back. And what you can see is that's been squared off quite nicely. So that's now the chain on, and we're now ready to tighten the front sprocket and the rear sprocket. So what we'll do is just get a few things out of the way. Put away the chain tool. What we normally do afterwards is to oil it up nicely so it doesn't corrode. But we'll do that once we're finished with everything else. So at the moment I'll just put it away in the box, create a bit of space just to allow us to finish off installing everything. What you want to do is to just pop this into gear. So that's now in first gear. It's a good point to start. The front nut goes up to 125 millimeters. So I need an extension on actually. So just extension on and the 32 mil socket. And then we just set this to 25. We might need to get some help and get somebody to hold the rear brake for me, but we'll see how far we can get before we get to that. And then okay, that seemed more easy, so we didn't need anybody to hold the rear brake for us. So that is that torqued up, and then we do need to fold over the lock washer as well. So I normally get this started with a screwdriver. Just carefully get that into place, and then we start to bend up. Edges. So actually, I'll get a set of pliers to do that. We just need to get the front flanges on the lock washer tightened up. So get a pair of pliers. Ideally, have a bigger set of pliers. You can squeeze across both flats, but as we only have these little ones available, we'll just very carefully pull this up and fold it. There we go. One side done, and the other side is almost there. So not the tidiest job, a bit easier with bigger pliers, but hey, you gotta work with what you have. Right. So now let's get the rear sprocket done up. That out of the way. So we need the 18mm socket and torque wrench, and as I said, 110 Newton meters. So what we want to do is tighten up in pretty much a star pattern, so not sequential nuts. It's a bit trickier with it on the bike, but effectively we'll just start with the one that's visible here, and then we just have to slowly spin it around and tighten it up. So I'll just change this back to 110 meters, which is there. And then that's one done up. Just get around, just get another one into position. Alright, so we've done all of them. I'm just going to go around, keep going around with every second one, and checking. So, just to recap, we have rear sprockets done up, front sprockets done up. Now, what we have to do is assemble the front cover, put the shifter back on, and then we can adjust the chain tension. We could adjust chain tension now, but let's just get the front cover on, get everything back together, and then we're in a good place to continue. So, here we have the front cover. We've got bolts for it as well. All 4 bolts are exactly the same, so we don't have to worry about which one goes where. So what we have to do is to thread the kickstand cable back through this recess and then pop it all back on again. So effectively, to know what the top is, 2 bolt spacings which are closer together at the top, and then the cable run is again around the front and then down towards the bottom. So we can just start to feed that in, and may need a bit of adjustment just to once we have it all together, but let's just get that in there first just to make sure that we don't clamp the cable in between this and the engine or anything like that. Right, so it covers back on, and then we put this back on as well, shift linkage. So one thing to keep in mind, standard shift is on the front. If you want MotoGP shift, you can just bolt it up to the rear hole. And we're going for standard shift. And again, what you want to do is make sure there's a bit of grease in here. Actually, we'll tighten up the bolt first and we'll drop the grease in. So we'll just put this into standard hole. That's done up, and then I will just put a little bit of grease here, and just to avoid corrosion and stuff like that. So just fill up that with grease and pop it back on, and there we go. That's good to go. Also grease the kickstand a little bit, just as we're degreasing in the area previously, so just want to make sure that it is all well lubed. And there we go. Alright, so front sprocket's on, front sprocket cover's on, rear axle's still quite loose. So what we'll do is just tighten this up a little bit just to snug it up. And then we'll adjust the chain tension. So we'll just pop that into neutral, just so you can spin around, and then what we should find is the chain should be fairly even. Might be a couple slightly stiff links, but generally it's looking good. Fairly even chain tension, maybe a very slight tight spot around there. So that's where we will adjust the chain tension to start with, and then check again a few times along the way. So I just have to loosen that off a little bit, just to make sure you can slide it around. And then we just check where we are with tension position. So we can just count on these. So we're on the 5th notch here. And this side is also on the 5th notch. So we want about 50 millimeters of play, 45 to 50 millimeters of play on here. You should also see that on the side of your swing arm if you still have the sticker fitted. So at the moment we have, of course, way more than that because we have slid these forward. So we'll just back this off and make sure we keep it even both sides. So this side now we have 1, 2, 3, 4. 5th notch on the bottom is just becoming visible. The marker. We'll just do the other side to the same position and see where we're. So that is probably very close to 50 mil. So if you take a normal kind of credit card, that's probably about the amount of movement that you want. So what you do find is from the bottom to the top. So that's probably about right. So just double check we're even. I can wind this one out just a little bit more. And then we tighten this up. And we'll just check that looks pretty even all the way around. Yeah, it's not bad. So we get 13 mil span out, and we just tighten this up. So what we're going to do is hold this back one in position and just tighten that up just to lock it off. And we do the same thing to the other side. Right, so that's locked off. We're going to tighten this to 100 Newton meters. So we get the torque wrench back out and put the 34 mil socket on. And then we just change this to 100, which is about there. Right, so that's tightened up, and then we do a final check on chain tension. So that looks pretty decent all the way around. Yeah, so I think that's it now, pretty much done. What we can do is the chain. One last thing to do is, since we've had the rear wheel off, sometimes the rear pads can come apart a bit, so you should just press the rear brake and make sure that everything is good to go. So just pump the rear brake a couple times, and that's now all good to go. So that's how to change chain on S1000RR. What you want to do is probably take it out for a very short ride, come back, check that everything's tight, nothing is dislodged, so make sure the torque on that's tight, torque on those is good. Put some oil on the chain, and that's it, you're good to go.